channel. Kim1 here. Today I have a new segment for you called National Rebuild. In this segment, we're going to take a look at the different things we need to address in order to rebuild the nation entirely. Disclaimer, all data will not be accurate due to records not being updated. Kicking off our first segment here, we have road cost per state. And what we're doing here is breaking down what it will cost to replace and patch every mile of roadway in each state. So starting on the left here, we have Maine. Maine has 22,787.08 miles of roadway, and the cost per lane mile to repave a mile of roadway in Maine costs $14,379 as of 2019. So we do the total miles of roadway in Maine, which is 22,787.08 miles of roadway, times the $14,379 to repave a mile of roadway in Maine, and we end up with $327.6 million plus to replace and patch all of Maine's roads. Moving over to the right here, we have New Hampshire. New Hampshire has 17,000 miles of roadway, and the cost per lane mile in New Hampshire to replace a mile of roadway in New Hampshire is $96,000 as of 2019. So down here towards the middle here, to repave and replace all of New Hampshire's roadway, it'll cost $222.6 million plus to repave and replace and patch all of New Hampshire's roadways. Now to speed this process up and to make it easier on all of us, what I'm going to do is just call out the amount of money it'll take to replace and patch every state's roadways. So next up we have Vermont. Vermont, to replace and patch all of its roadways, it'll cost $277.7 million plus. And then moving over to the right, we have Massachusetts. It'll cost $1.1 billion to replace all of Massachusetts roadways. Rhode Island will cost $132.7 million plus to replace and patch all of its roadways. Then moving over to the right, we have Connecticut. Connecticut, to replace and patch all of its roadways, will cost $574.5 million plus. New York will cost $5.6 billion plus to replace and patch all of its roadways. Then moving over to the right, we have New Jersey. To replace and patch all of its roadways will cost $3.3 billion plus. For Pennsylvania, it'll cost $613.4 million plus. Moving over, we have Delaware next. It'll cost $176.3 million plus. Maryland will cost $520.4 million plus to replace and patch all of its roads. Moving over, we have Virginia. Virginia will cost $796.07 million plus to replace and patch all of its roads. West Virginia will cost $169.5 million plus to replace and patch all of its roads. Moving over, we have North Carolina. It'll cost $589.4 million plus to replace all of its roads. Next up, we have South Carolina. It'll cost $255.3 million to replace all of South Carolina's roads. Moving over, we have Georgia. It'll cost $1.1 billion to patch and replace all of Georgia's roads. For Florida, it'll cost $8.9 billion to replace and patch all of its roadways. Next up, we have Alabama. It'll cost $652.5 million plus to replace all of Alabama's roads. And next up to the states, ladies and gentlemen, is the only Tennessee. It'll cost $1.029 billion plus to replace and patch all of Tennessee's roads. And for the home state, for the Colonel himself, it'll cost $625.9 million plus to replace all of Kentucky's roads. Moving on over, we have Ohio up next. It'll cost $2.5 billion plus to replace and patch all of Ohio's roads. And then over to the right, we have Michigan. It'll cost $1.6 billion plus For Indiana, it'll cost $957.7 million plus to replace and patch all of its roadways. And then moving over to the right is Illinois. It'll cost $1.5 billion plus. Hello, Wisconsin! It'll cost $1.1 billion plus to replace all of Wisconsin's roadways. And then to the right of that is Minnesota. For Minnesota, it'll cost $2.6 billion plus. The Mighty Mo. For Missouri, it'll cost $1.7 billion plus to replace and patch all of its roadways. And then moving over to the right, we have Iowa. And for Iowa, it'll cost $2.3 billion plus. Arkansas. For Arkansas, it'll cost $1.1 billion plus to replace and patch all of its roadways. And then to the right of that is Mississippi. It'll cost $686.7 million plus to replace all of its roadways. All my exes live in Texas. The Lone Star State, Texas. It'll cost $3.3 billion plus to replace and patch all of Texas roadways. To the right of that is Louisiana. It'll cost $1.4 billion plus to replace and patch all of its roadways. Oklahoma. It'll cost $5.4 billion plus to replace and patch all of its roadways. And then next up is Kansas. It'll cost $1.1 billion plus to replace and patch all of its roadways. Nebraska. It'll cost $956.8 million plus to replace and patch all of its roadways. And then next up is South Dakota. It'll cost $453.09 million plus to replace and patch all of its roadways. North Dakota. It'll cost $315.8 million plus to replace and patch all of its roadways. And then we have Montana. It'll cost $1.5 billion plus to replace and patch all of its roadways. For Wyoming, it'll cost $393.6 million plus to patch and replace all of its roadways. And for Colorado, it'll cost $535.2 million plus to patch and replace all of its roadways. Next on the scene is New Mexico, and it'll cost $255.8 million plus to patch and replace all of New Mexico's roadways. And for Arizona, it'll cost $1.06 billion plus to patch and replace all of Arizona's roadways. Utah, it'll cost $790.7 million plus to replace and patch all of Utah's roadways. To the right of that is Idaho. It'll cost $255.5 million plus to patch and replace all of Idaho's roadways. Washington State, it'll cost $9.9 billion plus to patch and replace all of Washington's roadways. And then for Oregon, it'll cost $1.9 billion plus to replace and patch all of Oregon's roadways. Nevada, it'll cost $825.3 million plus to replace and patch all of Nevada's roadways. And then for California, it'll cost $17.2 billion plus to replace and patch all of California's roadways. Alaska, it'll cost $399.5 million plus to replace and patch all of Alaska's roadways. And then for Hawaii, it will cost $231.5 million plus to patch and replace all of Hawaii's roadways. So if all data was correct, it'll cost $92.2 billion plus to replace and patch every state's roadways. But I just want you to keep in mind, this does not include overrun costs and unforeseen matters, as well as these figures don't take into account man hours, pay, weather events, national disasters, cost of material, like I said, just things that we can't foresee at this time. Okay folks, so what you're seeing here is one of the emails that I sent out to all 50 states requesting the information, for what it will take to replace and patch all of their roads. And I'm providing this to you to show you that I'm being stonewalled, and also that it's another reason why it's taking me so long to get my videos put out. So, this is just one of 3 out of the, many other emails that I sent out. And I'll show you that in the next few slides. Here's Virginia's response. So Virginia's Department of Transportation reached back out to me, and here's what they said. And for my last example, we have South Carolina, and here's what they said. So we made it to the end of one of many videos to come. Stay tuned for part 2 coming up at a future date. And go ahead and leave your comments down in the comment section below on what you think and what all we need to do to rebuild this nation. Thank you.